Yeah. I was just saying, I'm kind of bummed out by how just crappy people are to each other. My neighbor's dealing with this thing. So I was fighting with our landlord for a long time, just about different stuff. And like, we didn't have running water for like 5 days.
Not important.
Dude, that really sucks. It is a pain.
Yeah.
It's such a pain. And they're like, no, this is not our responsibility. Like, there's no break on rent. There's no anything. And it's driving me crazy. And like, I'm arguing with them. And at a certain point, I'm like, am I wrong about this? But our neighbor, the roof caved in.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah. And she'd been telling them for like weeks that there were holes in the roof and like water was getting down with all the rain and dripping into her apartment. And like, no, that's not a problem. That's not something we need to fix. And then her ceiling like collapsed.
Wow.
And they're still insisting like they're not giving her a different unit. They're not paying for a hotel. They're like, no, it's not an unlivable apartment. Your bedroom is fine.
I mean, it sounds like somebody should probably sue.
Right, but like the rules in Texas are really weird, where like you can only sue for up to $500.
What?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any... I don't know if I believe that. What are you talking about? I don't know. Maybe you're right.
For tenants' rights, the main thing you can sue for is to break the lease. Mm-hmm. But in terms of like remuneration of rent, it's usually up to $500.
But if there's something incredibly egregious, like, you know, a hole in the ceiling, I'm sure a good lawyer could probably work that out.
But the other thing I found is lawyers don't particularly like taking on tenant issues because there's very little money in it.
I see. Okay. Well, that sucks. No, yeah. I mean, that's very bad. Yeah. That's crazy. I mean, yeah, you had the same issues. I don't know if we should detail it, but you had similar issues with another thing with them. Yeah. So,
right.
Yeah.
And it just comes down to they are arguing that it isn't unlivable. It's like the standard that it's all going around is livability.
Oh, my God.
What is the presumption of livability? And for them, as long as you have, if you have a hole in your ceiling, whatever, as long as you got a working bedroom.
Even though you have Tweety Bird flying in.
Yeah, right, exactly. No, there are animals living in the walls here.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Anyway,
it's just like it's to me it's the human aspect of like how can you be a building manager and think that that's like our neighbor, like her life is really like she's really upset at the moment, understandably. And like really demoralized having to go through this and like live with that. And it just sucks ass to treat other people like that. There's vacant units here.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I also live in Texas. I live in a different city, but I haven't had that sort of experience with a landlord. Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they're all like that, but it seems like I've read a lot of horror stories around Austin of these companies that buy up these cheap properties and basically like treat people terrible. Dude, I have a friend who got stabbed, like was in the hospital, got attacked. Somebody tried to stab him to death. He got stabbed like 8 times.
Somebody they know?
They have no idea who it was.
It was a random person.
They didn't see it. The person attacked him from behind, knocked him out, and they woke up with like stab wounds.
That's terrifying.
And somebody called 911 and got them to the hospital. But yeah, it is
what
terrifying.
The hell?
And their apartment got set on fire.
So this sounds like somebody was trying to kill them.
Right. But they just have no idea who.
This is a musician in Austin?
Yeah. I'm playing a show with him on Saturday.
I'm laughing because it's so wild. I mean,
it's insane.
It's actually funny.
But another landlord thing, because his apartment was set on fire, it damaged like 20 apartments. And so he's no longer allowed on the premises, and his landlord wouldn't let him go in to get his stuff because it wasn't all destroyed.
That's crazy.
And the landlord said you're not allowed on the property anymore because it's a liability to our property.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. So he can't get his stuff.
Nope.
I don't know, man. I mean, Yeah, I would lawyer up if they can. I mean, that's really the only thing that you can do. You have to fight these things with lawfare.
Exactly, and lawyers
yeah.
will cost 10 times what you'll get back.
Which is why this is the episode that we're going to announce that you're going to law school, so that we can engage in our own lawfare.
I would. My wife would be so mad at me if I went to law school to go into tenant law. Like I go into so much debt to lose money.
To make a point. Yeah, no, she would not be happy. But you know what they say?
I kind of want. It's this thing where it's like it feels like it's needed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the problem, and I mean, this kind of gets into the book. We're going to continue on with the book, "The Social Transformation of American Medicine" by Paul Starr. We did chapter 2, and I read maybe about half of chapter 3, which starts to detail how the professional class of medicine in America became a thing, and a lot of it is through law regulations. I mean, that was basically, I think that's the big take home for chapter 3 is, I mean, the AMA, what the American Medical Association, was instrumental in sort of organizing everything. But what actually gave physicians the leverage to become such a powerful professional class was, basically lobbying state and federal legislators to pass laws. And so you have to do this stuff with lawyers, and it requires money. And so you're right. I mean, there's not a lot for the average person that they can do. And I guess that's kind of how it's not supposed to, a functioning society shouldn't have the average person not be able to do something. But having the only ways of fighting something like this through lawyers or a professional class does seem to be the logical end of any civilized society, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know what I'm saying. I guess I'm saying it sucks, but probably the only thing they can do is get a lawyer, and yeah, you're right, it's going to cost a bunch of money. So, which is why everybody should just go to law school. Or, you talk about, again, so this is getting into a monopolization of that the professional class has done. So I think that's another thing is I like this a lot because it's bringing up what were these laws that got passed, and should we be revisiting these things? Should lawyers be the only one that are allowed to practice law? Should doctors be the only one that are allowed to practice law? That's basically the conclusion.
I mean, that's kind of
medicine. Should doctors be the only one allowed?
Should doctors be the ones practicing law? Actually.
Now we're getting to the bottom of it.
Yeah, that's kind of what we were talking about last week. Okay, so just to clarify to the audience, I did just look it up. So it's not just $500. It's what you can sue for is 1 month's rent plus $500. That's the maximum in terms of rent remedy.
Well, rent remedy, but that's my point. Is you can, if it's egregious enough, it wouldn't be under rent remedy. It would be
if it's these are for repairs. So like if you like the ceiling repair, if something needs to be repaired and it doesn't get repaired within a timely fashion, you can sue for 1 month's rent plus $500, actual damage, court costs, and reasonable attorney fees. So you could, if you win, make them pay all that stuff.
Under the rent remedy.
This is no. Those are sort of like 4 things under repair, like suing for not timely repairs.
Yeah, I guess my point is it's not even a matter of timeliness of the repair. That's kind of the point I'm trying to make.
So, yeah, I agree. But from the lawyers I've talked to, all this stuff in Texas, the repair is the only thing that tenants have.
Okay. Well, fair enough. I mean, then this is, I guess.
Because of how Texas law is written, there's no.
Other
than that, like, you've signed a contract to pay them.
But it sounds like negligence of being a landlord, I suppose I would say. It's not even a timeliness. It's that you let the place become such a dilapidated state by not addressing it.
Yeah, I agree.
And it made
with
it
you.
unsafe. So this is my point. Is I just think that they're talking to not very good lawyers. That's really my point.
Yeah, maybe. It's just this is what everything I've read is that you're screwed in Texas, essentially.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, so that's
if you talk to a bad lawyer. I think that there are
I've
probably good
talked to
lawyers.
like 4 lawyers now.
Okay, well, they're all bad.
Maybe. But then how do I find a good one?
You pay a lot of money. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Well, the ones that I was talking to were like a minimum of like $3,000 just to get them to send a letter, just to get them to start the process.
Yeah. We're talking about a $150,000 retainer here, Antushka.
Yeah. Okay, anyway. So this gets back to what we were talking about last week with the situation of is it better under like a restrictive licensing system like the AMA, or is it better in a situation where those aren't the only people allowed to practice and sort of it's a more sort of dispersed and potentially competitive marketplace?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, the thing is, it was actually, and I actually posted this quote on Instagram. I mean, this is chapter 3, but I mean, they're kind of chapter 2 and 3 are a little bit joined at the hip. I mean, so chapter 2 was about the expansion of the market for medicine.
Yeah, there's interesting history in chapter 2 about stuff that I hadn't really thought about the revolutions in the 20th century of transportation and communication being major turning points shifting towards a marketplace, because people had the ability to go to a doctor or to call a doctor, to communicate with a doctor, versus before then it was very costly to even go and find a doctor to talk to. Right.
Yes. And yeah, exactly. That was why you had the itinerant physician. They had to walk everywhere. This is why patient load was lower, because they had to walk. Was it you that was making a point about, somebody was making a point about plumbers, why they need to charge more? Oh, no, maybe this was, God, I think this was just an X thread that I was reading. Now I'm remembering it like a conversation.
Yeah, that's funny.
I've been on X too much. It was, it was basically saying, like, the reason why, for instance, plumbers have to charge a lot is because they're going to places. So, it was making the point in the 19th century, physicians were charging, a lot of their bills were coming from just the travel expense that they would charge patients. And because most of the time it was just a little thing. I was trying to find, there's this quote in chapter 3 where it's talking about how, there's this big civil war in medicine in the 19th century between homeopaths, allopaths, which I thought was interesting, was actually coined by homeopaths, and then eclectic physicians, which were a branch of the Thomsonians, which we talked about last week. And basically, there was a war in the 1870s. The AMA started pressuring medical societies to expel homeopathic physicians from the societies. And in doing so, basically, they pissed a lot of people off, obviously.
Right.
And the New York Times was actually quoted in this as being on the side of the homeopaths, saying, and here's the whole point of this tirade, is that they felt like any intelligent person would look at this as sort of a monopolization tactic, and competition is good for medicine. And this is something that also William James, the famous, the kind of one of the founders of psychology, or maybe the founder of psychology, I guess he's often the first person you talk about in a psychology course, also was leveraging the I think it was the Massachusetts Medical Society, saying that there shouldn't be licensure because it will break up the competition and be bad for medical research and everything.
Right.
So there, it wasn't just a given that we should be going towards licensure. It's very interesting, to think about that. But yeah, anyway, that's the point I wanted to make before jumping into chapter 2. Because we should probably just start in chronological order, get back to the expansion of the market.
Well, what do you think about it? Because we were talking about, I feel like, I remember last week it was sort of an exchange between Brother X and me, but what is your thought on that, the monopolization, centralization, versus, like a completely open marketplace or somewhere in the middle?
I think that it should be somewhere in the middle. I think right now it's too monopolized.
Right.
And maybe in like the early 1800s, it wasn't monopolized enough.
Right.
So we're saying like the 1840s is the ideal. No. Yeah, no, I think that's really it, because I agree. I mean, it allows, monopolization allows people to, be more efficient, because that's the whole thing.
Right.
I mean, more efficient in that, in their ability to defend themselves, I suppose.
Right.
And it makes for a cushier lifestyle for the people, because that was another thing that like had them go towards making the AMA, was to, then they could charge dues, and then they could start getting malpractice insurance and helping hire lawyers to pay for that sort of thing, and just all these other things that it had to do. So there's obviously pluses to monopolization, but the downside, I think, is it stifles creativity and innovation. I think that's the big thing, and that should not be discounted. And I think actually there are a group of people that, whether conscious or not, actually do want to stifle innovation, which is, I think, one of the reasons they push for monopolization. I guess that's just a point I feel like doesn't get talked about a lot, is that there are some people who don't want the innovation that competition brings, because it's tiresome. I mean, a lot of people just don't want to get up every day and have to like hustle,
Right.
And if you're in the open market, you have to hustle every minute, because there's always a bigger fish.
Yeah. That's
so
true.
anyway, so the short answer is I think that it needs to be less monopolized now. I think having like one or two or three specialties that of medicine is actually good for it. And I guess you could say we kind of have that with DOs and chiropractors. But I think that the AMA, through its lobbying power, still has a lot more sway on who can actually treat people and whatnot.
Right.
And if anything, I don't know. But I need to read more about this, which is why we're reading this book.
Right,
because,
right.
I can go down a ton of rabbit holes. So anyway, that's my long answer.
Yeah, it's tricky. I think that there's a lot of anxiety with medicine, just like with anything that has become highly centralized. There's a question of, how will these services be dispersed if things aren't centralized? And I think it is a very anxiety-inducing idea to sort of pull the rug out of the system as we know it. And that's essentially what I'm beginning to feel is the main thing, that the main piece of resistance is it's an emotional resistance to a status quo. And it's like what you're saying, there's always a bigger fish. The idea of a changing system that's highly competitive is sort of scary, even if you can sort of logically show that the current system is actually sort of anti-innovation and stuck. The current system might even be creating worse outcomes, and somebody might even acknowledge that and still prefer it just emotionally out of the comfort of not changing it.
Well, and again, I mean, because not changing it brings, first off, its own chaotic event. And then, I really do think there's, in many of us, and potentially all of us, there's a desire for stability as we get older.
Right.
Of just like, you get tired of constantly, battling. A lot of people, not me.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say to those people is, given the trajectory of the current system, the battles are just going to keep getting worse.
Well, yes, of course.
Like having to battle about what you discussed. Like, do I have to pay for different topics? That's a new one. I've never heard of that before. And the doctor hadn't heard of it before either. And I just think that stuff is going to keep getting worse.
That's been something for a while. I mean, it's always built off of systems, and allergy is just a system. That's how it's viewed. Now we could talk about that, whether it should be. But But, it like, you'll bill for like 3 systems, like GI, lungs, and heart.
Right.
And that's, in a short visit. But if it's a full visit, you would get all the systems.
Right.
So that's probably how it was billed. And I'm sure the doctor knew that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have maybe he's lying to me. What I'm saying is that I think that the battles are going to get worse as the bureaucracy builds, because it'll be more nodes to deal with, and each node will have less responsibility.
Yes.
So each person will be able to help you less and less.
Right. No, I understand. And so, yeah, I mean, so we made the point of why, I guess demonopolization is good. But I think what I also liked about this chapter 2 is that it was presenting a lot of real reasons for why at least physicians and in many cases also patients wanted more centralization. Like patients felt like, in the early 1800s, it would be hard to know who was a reputable physician without some sort of licensing matter. Also then, as it's getting to the point, in the beginning of chapter 2, as it talks about how physicians were paid, and it's saying how English physicians actually largely looked at medical care as philanthropic. So you would have wealthy people paying for a lot of it in society, and you had price fixing was a lot of things too. So you had sort of early, obviously Europe developed a monopolized medical establishment before America. And they would have, in 1633 in Massachusetts, so this is America. Well, here, in 1736, the House of Burgesses enacted a lengthy fee schedule for physicians, whereas later schedules consisted of minimum fees would be issued by medical societies hoping to prevent price cutting. And then, again, in 1766, the Chief Justice of Massachusetts ruled that travel for physicians, their drug, and attendance have as fixed a price as goods sold by a shopkeeper. So they were trying to control the market there.
Right.
And you also had sort of early forms of, I guess you could say, insurance through contract care. So, it says the law, medical societies tried to assume some function the state had abandoned. The law nowhere settles the precise value of professional opinion or advice, noted the New England Journal of Medicine in 1825. Sorry, I went back too far. But yeah, anyway, most physicians were paid by a fee per service or a fee per case. Some were retained for a fixed fee per annum to provide all needed care to a family, a plantation, or indigent members of community, called contract practice. And then, but it goes on to say that there were still a lot of unpaid bills. So most medical care was provided on credit. Physicians tried to collect fees quarterly or annually, but they lost a substantial portion of their income through unpaid bills. So that's been a thing forever. And this is kind of the point, is I think also the professionalization of medicine allowed these physicians to now contract the state to to enforce these laws,
Right.
Or these payments rather. Whereas when they were a unmonopolized group, it's just, and you're independent, it's like, what are you going to do? How are you going to force people to pay you? If you just, you sue them, but then you're just one guy. So having a,
or you do the Russian model and you don't give them care until they pay you.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm sure people did that.
What did you say?
I'm sure people did that. I'm sure there were physicians that did that.
Yeah. My friend Daria from college always used to talk about how they did that in Russia. Like you could not get care from a physician until you paid them. Even like giving birth, they would just stand by and wait for you to hand them money. But I can see the sort of the market problem in it, because if you are a family, in the 1800s, and you have your sort of expenses that you're dealing with, medical care is sort of this extra expense that you only need every now and then. And so I can also see where the insurance system of the modern situation is addressing that problem because it becomes baked into your monthly expenses. And so in a way, it's easier to deal with than something that sort of comes up once a year or once every couple of years, some really big bill.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And yeah, no, it's not an easy problem. And I think that's also what I liked about this book is it's pretty even-handed in how it's describing. I mean, it's unbiased, pretty well unbiased, I think. In explaining that, yeah, there are a lot of problems with how to get paid for this. I mean, and so that was another sort of theme is that, I mean, you also had physicians that were lamenting that you couldn't make a fortune in medicine in the early 1800s, which is, There's a funny quote of how there was like a physician who decided to go into it, but his dad was mad at him actually because he was like, "You're never going to make any money with medicine. Become a lawyer, or or go into the market, finance."
My loser, son.
Basically, yeah. I mean, I'll try to find the quote.
It's like, I'd rather you be a poet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but you're right. So, I mean, a lot of, it makes a point that another thing that was helping this monopolization occur, and I would say increasing the authority of physicians and helping them serve more patients was they were an early users of the telephone, cars, and trains.
Right.
And these all reduced what the guy termed as the indirect costs of medicine. So you had the direct cost, but which is actual cost of treatment and seeing the patient, but you had indirect costs of transportation and everything like that.
How do you get there? How do you get in contact with them?
Yeah, where is the doctor? If the doctor's itinerant, then you can't just go to their office and find them if you have an issue. So, you had to, it was building this case for why people also didn't need doctors as much in the 1800s. But then as all these technologies allowed for greater communication, and then as urbanization occurred and you just had more people living in cities, it was saying, this created a larger dependence on doctors by the population versus when they were all farmers and, largely a lot of what happened to the family would get treated by like the mother or somebody in the family. So this helped. I mean, our dependency upon doctors helped. It wasn't all, this, I guess, conspiracy by the AMA to enact a monopoly to get licensure. It was like there were a lot of forces that were pushing towards consolidation.
It also shifts the cost from the physician to the consumer. If the consumer is paying to get to the doctor, and the doctor can be in one location seeing multiple patients a day, the doctor can make use of economies of scale, and the cost of transportation or communication then rests at least more on the consumer versus the doctor having to go house to house. Right. I mean, it's the same thing as somebody who teaches music lessons. I mean, that's like a miserable existence.
Yes. Yeah.
Like driving all day from house to house to house. Yeah.
Which is why Zoom, like the pandemic, was actually kind of good for you, right? It pushed a lot of your stuff to Zoom.
The quality of lessons went way down, but
yeah, true. Yeah, true. But you still do some Zoom lessons, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll do a job if someone pays me to do a job, but
I know.
But I mean, the quality goes. I mean, it's like telehealth. The quality of care is, I'm sure, not as good.
No. Yeah. No. I mean, yeah. So another thing that was pushing towards, I guess, the expansion of the market and also the power of physicians was hospitals. As cities increased, you had more hospitals. It talks about all these statistics of how the number of hospitals in the late 1800s was just spiking compared to the early 1800s. And also, it talks about Pinel and Tukey, which was interesting, who Foucault basically centers his birth of the clinic on. Because, they were French and or English and French, respectively.
Right.
People who really expanded the market for the insane asylums. Basically, they were reforming how we dealt with mental health and kind of inventing the insane asylum. And they were just talking about how you had this shift in medical thought from, at least with the mentally ill, to instead of trying to restrain them, trying to cure them. And Foucault talks about this in Madness and Civilization, too.
Right.
So you had a statization of medicine happening in the 1800s that also helped increase their power. You know, if you have these centers where people have to go, it needs organization, it needs funding and everything.
Right.
And yeah, like you were saying, it sort of puts more power in the physicians by having the patients come to them. You know, yeah.
Right. And then, like what you're saying with hospitals, the institutionalization is another way of making use of economies of scale, because you can put a whole bunch of patients in one area.
Yes, institutionalization was the word I was looking for.
Nice.
That's very good.
Thanks. Happy to help.
So I think those are the big points in chapter 2.
I think so. So one thing I think that I appreciate about the way that he's dealing with it, and I'll be curious as we get further in the book, because I think he says there's a note somewhere at the beginning about how his political leanings will become clear at the end of the book. And so I don't actually know, like, if he's a libertarian or a socialist or something. It feels like it kind of could go either way. But his focus on economics is interesting because it distills it to a very understandable situation where you can see exactly why the things happened that have happened. And it's not necessarily casting people as individually malevolent. But it really is an economic issue. And it's like what you're saying about how, a parent is saying, don't become a doctor, there's no money in it. It really is an economic thing. And so at a certain point, there are people who want to be doctors, but it's just not economically feasible. And so they have to come up with ways of making it economically feasible. And then as society shifts and technology changes, new opportunities open up. And then it sort of begins to work in tandem. And then, over the course of the 20th century, it's all just essentially economic and market forces driving it. And that's all it is. And I think that that is as a distillation of all of these things, like people who are anti-capitalist, I feel like miss this about how everybody needs to be paid.
Well, but they would say in the capitalist system, that's what made it an economic issue. And it wasn't an economic issue in the 18th century and earlier. It was more about status. Like medicine was more divorced from economics in the feudal states. And then as industrialization and capitalism and the market economy developed in the late 18th and then into the 19th century, it became an economic issue for physicians as it became commodified. That's, I think, what an anti-capitalist would perceive.
Yeah, probably. And I think the capitalists would say that everything throughout all of history, it moves in this same way. Is like when there's an incentive structure to do something where somebody will profit, that will be where people will coalesce, and that's where development will happen. And so development as like of medicine as a profession doesn't happen until there are economic forces that can coalesce around it.
Well, yeah, because economic forces create power. So that's why I think actually, it talks about in chapter 3, like 1901 or something, the AMA had a major reform to their structure, and one of the things was charging dues.
Right.
And it's like charging dues then gives you subscriptions. You have money now, and you can put money towards lobbying, you can put it towards malpractice insurance, you can put it towards just, donations to medical schools to enact help, enact your philosophies and everything like that.
It also increases loyalty from your subscribers,
Right.
because they've invested now.
Right. And I mean, look at one of the, how has the Catholic Church and really every church survived for so long, but through tidings. Mm-hmm. So yeah, the subscription model is an old, well-established model for if you want to gain monopolistic power.
Right.
You have to get to that point.
So what I'm hearing is, as a podcast, the way that we revolutionize the whole space
Patreon.
and take over. Yeah, right. Now, we don't have a Patreon, but
No.
if one of our listeners would like to set up a Patreon for us.
Yeah. Yeah. One of our thousands. One of you out there.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, no, I mean, I think, yes. So I think it certainly is an economic issue. I guess there could be we could go into a philosophical rabbit hole of discussing whether everything is fundamentally an economic issue, because it's fundamentally a resource issue,
right?
Survival.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's from how you perceive it. I guess if we're talking about perception of the problem and why you would do something, I do agree. Medicine was very much an economic issue, or perceived as one in the 19th century.
Yeah. I mean, and that's it. I would say, at least for this book, that's sort of the story he's laying out, as I'm understanding it.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. So did you get a chance to read much of chapter 3?
No.
It's okay. I knew it.
You knew it?
It was long. I mean, it was like 60 pages, and then, chapter 2 was already 20 or something.
Yeah.
So, and these are big, dense pages too, might I add, for the listener. If you think that we're just idiots, you try to do this. We're doing this for you.
Yeah, they're like, these guys are such idiots. They didn't get through chapter 3. Oh.
Yeah. And part of the reason I was thinking last night whether I wanted to just push through it and finish chapter 3, because I got about, like I said, halfway through. But I stopped at when it started talking about the medical education reform, and I wanted to kind of really go through that slowly.
Right.
So I would like to read that for next time, I think.
Yeah. That's fine. So what would you say in terms of, so you're talking about chapter 3, talks about the AMA switching to a subscription model.
Yes.
And then you'd also mentioned earlier about maybe legislative changes that were happening.
Yes. If I can say, I took very good notes on this. So what I kind of perceive, hopefully the use of this podcast for other people, certainly is one of the things that I am trying to do with it, is as we go through these books, I'm trying to highlight, I think, important talking points, I suppose you could say, for things, and understanding the problem where if you want to look at it like that, or just inflection points. And so, I mean, there were a series of legislative changes. I think probably, where to even start? I think the biggest one was the Supreme Court. Okay, so let me back up before we get quite into that. So a lot of what it talks about, so chapter 3 is called The Consolidation of Professional Authority, 1850 to 1920. If you remember last episode, we talked about there was a lot of different branches of medicine. The Thompsonians was kind of the big rival to, I guess, as we would call them, orthodox or now allopathic physicians in the early 1800s. This sort of Thompsonian medicine morphed into something called eclectic, the eclectic branch of medicine in the mid and then later 19th century into the early 20th. You also had homeopaths became the other big branch that was big. This was invented by a German, I think he was a physician, I think he was an Orthodox physician, but I don't know that for sure. But he was German in the 18th century, and basically he pushed kind of in some ways the opposite, as they call it. So of the Orthodox physicians, so they termed it like treats like.
Yeah,
and they also perceive like the allopathic or Orthodox physicians as treating unlike treats unlike. So, which, I think a point could be made. The allopathic physicians push back against this because their whole thing was we don't have an orthodoxy or a dogma, believe it or not. So these were sort of terms thrown at them to describe them, but they didn't think it necessarily reflected them. So I bring all this up because this sets the stage for you have three sort of big players who are fighting for, I guess you could say, autonomy and everything. And so what happened in, like I said, the 1870s is when I think the allopaths really started to organize and try to start expelling the other people. But ultimately what happened was they worked together for a period. So there was actually, at the turn of the century, there was actually there were medical boards that were established that had homeopathic, eclectic, and allopathic physicians on them. So there was a little bit of people working together. But it describes this general trend for how medicine would go from licensure, from unlicensed to a licensed state. And it explains how actually all three of the big branches of medicine wanted this to happen. They wanted licensure to happen because it helped them beat out the completely, like renegade, anarchic, if you will, people from the field. And so what this did was, let me find the page.
While you're finding that, I just want to highlight that is like Milton Friedman makes this point, and I think it's an important thing for people to think about directly and contend with is things like licensure. Any type of regulation like that is designed to limit competition, and like what you're saying, they didn't like the rogue anarchic physicians doing their own thing that has nothing to do with the structures, the more intellectual structures or dogmatic structures or orthodox structures or whatever. But in another way of saying it, they are directly trying to limit competition. Right.
And I mean it very much is. And again, there are both patients and physicians who make these arguments for why it's a good thing,
Right. Yeah.
So I have on page 104 the genesis of licensing. So it said in many states licensing developed incrementally, and we're talking like in the 1870s ish. That's the period we're talking. First, a minimum statute was enacted requiring only a diploma, or I should say late 19th and into early 20s. Sorry. Then the principle was established that diplomas could be examined and candidates rejected if the school they had attended was judged inadequate. And finally, all candidates were required both to present an acceptable diploma and to pass an independent state exam. So again, first, minimum thing, you just needed a diploma to practice medicine. Then you need a diploma and it needs to be from a adequate place. So now you need to establish somebody to define what's adequate, which is where medical boards become established in states. And then the last step to, licensing is that you have to have an acceptable diploma and also pass an exam. And so they says that by 1901, 25 states in the District of Columbia were in that last category, while only 2 states were in the first. No jurisdiction was without a licensing statute of some sort.
Nice.
So by the 20th century.
It's interesting because I think it's the same period that state and federal regulations for public schooling started to crop up as well.
Right. Well, it was an institutionalization of everything because of industrialization.
Right.
Just to back up a little bit and reemphasize that. So the AMA, the American Association American Medical Association, was basically founded in 1846, I think. And it was talking about how it was founded largely by not even the people in the upper status of the allopathic branch, but the people like, I guess you would say like me, who haven't really established a career, but want a way to essentially stabilize the system
Right,
and, as
right.
you said, fight out the competition.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I just thought that was interesting because, 1840s was just a big year for change everywhere around the world, right? And, because you had the 1848 revolutions in Europe,
Right.
or whatever
Yep.
you want to call them. You had Marx writing his stuff. But yeah, it was, I think, a linchpin in all this consolidation is the establishment of an organization, and that organization for medicine is the AMA. That's kind of
Right.
the point. And so the AMA was instrumental in doing all this. As it grew in power, it grew the ability to lobby states to set
Right.
up medical examiners who
Yep.
were approved, by the AMA essentially, and then the medical examiners would be the ones to decide, is your school a good diploma or bad diploma? And now they're the ones that write the exams,
Right.
So, yeah, this was all very instrumental, and so again, hospitals were also helpful. But yeah, so key legislative thing is getting a medical board of
Right.
examiners. That's like a key point in the
A
establishment.
state medical board.
Yes, a state
Yeah.
medical board. Yep.
Right.
Yeah, because this was all done at the state level.
Right.
But you had a centralized structure through the AMA
Right.
and so this is another point I made in 1901 or something. So in 1903, the AMA adopted a revised code of ethics and said little about irregular practitioners. But it also made this. Oh, no, it was 1901. Okay, thank you. In 1901, the AMA revised its constitution, creating a new legislative body, the House of Delegates, with representatives drawn primarily from state medical societies in proportion to their membership. So that's another
Right.
point, is the AMA was working with medical societies, and this is how they were able to pressure medical societies to push out homeopaths and
Right.
whatnot. Previously, a hodgepodge of county and regional organizations as well as state societies had been entitled to send delegates to the AMA convention in the ratio of one representative for every 10 members. This is all kind of details we don't need to know. Basically, what it put in place was under the new Constitution, the House of Delegates had a fixed membership of 150 to be periodically reapportioned, as in the U.S. House of Representatives. So it had a more fixed organizational structure, and it also made a confederation of the state medical societies, which in turn would be the confederation of the county organization in the state. So you had this, giant spider web network. Henceforth, no doctors could be members of any higher professional association unless they first joined their own county organization, and then they also started collecting dues. And the organizational structure thus neatly forced all physicians who wanted to belong to their county medical society or to the national AMA to become dues-paying members of their state association, thus increasing their power and lobbying power.
It's Mussolini all over again. This is like Mussolini's wet dream.
And to your point, this was not just in medicine, and the author makes a point of this.
Right.
The federal structure of that the AMA adopted in 1901 was in fact copied from other national associations. So the other unions and everything, they were essentially taking the structure. So
I think that a key point here that's interesting to me is the fact that the AMA is using its money to instead of trying to sort of just build itself up, to actually entrench itself with state power. And
but that is building itself up.
Yeah, but there's different ways of building yourself up. I'm saying that I don't think the only way of building yourself up is state power. I've never once tried to entrench myself with the state, but I'm always trying to build myself up.
But how much power do you have, Antushka?
Right. What I'm saying is that that particular move, I think, is key to this history and is creating a space for medicine that is beyond a market space. It's beyond like a purely capitalistic market space, taking it into the world of corporatization with government. And the reason I was making that joke about Mussolini's wet dream is the idea of like the corporatized guild world being tied to the government. I mean, that's exactly what he was writing about as like his ideal society kind of a thing. And you can see it's not just in medicine, but like all of these organizations and guilds that are trying to tie themselves to state power are laying the groundwork for like progressivism and fascism and all of the political movements in the 20th century.
Right. And ultimately for protection. I mean, it empowered the physicians against things like malpractice and whatnot, because, I mean, it talks about how there's this thing called the locality rule, which was a law that the courts prepared through, I think, lobbying from the AMA and physicians,
Right.
That basically made it so that, sorry, I'm trying to find the exact quote, but I can't, so let me just explain it in my own terms. Basically, it meant that if you were being charged with negligence or malpractice or something, you could only have a physician within a certain area come and argue against you and say, like, this physician is obviously a quack because of X, Y, Z.
Right.
So what this made, and because the AMA had this structure where you had to be part of your local, AMA chapter or medical society to even be in good standing as a physician. And because part of the AMA was ethics was don't disparage your fellow physicians.
Right.
At least in
so
public.
they do have a dogma, or they do have an orthodox.
Though they have a code of ethics, and one of the code of ethics was
Right.
don't argue with other physicians in public, essentially. Take a very muted response
Right.
if you're going to have disputes, and don't steal patients from other physicians. So it was trying to create a cooperation. And so what this did is if you have a local physician come and, and if you have to have a local physician come as the counsel in a trial, they're going to be much, much less likely to speak ill of a colleague.
Right.
So it made it hard, so that offered protection is the point. And that's the big thing that these organizations do. And getting back to our point about how people, I think, are always kind of working towards a more protected status, whether or not they're doing it in a good way. But you could certainly say it was an effective way.
It was definitely effective. I don't know if there is a good way in this case. I mean, this is just my personal belief. I don't think there is such a thing as a good deal with the government. I think it's always a deal with the devil. But but you can see, I mean, even what you're saying, you can see the paternalism in that idea. I mean, the not arguing, physicians not publicly arguing with each other. That's like what parents do.
Yes.
And the idea, I mean, you can see the it's kind of like an arrogance that, we are these special people, these priests with this special knowledge.
Right.
Dealing with the public, and the public can't know about our disputes because that'll start to erode their trust in us.
Well, that was actually very explicitly said too. There was, I should find the exact quote. But there was a physician quoted in this from, I think, the late 19th century. That, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to find it, but again, I'll just explain it. That basically said you should talk about things in a cryptic way so that the patients don't steal from you, and then they don't need you anymore too. Like, you need to create a dependency.
Right. Yeah, of course.
It was explicitly discussed.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, it was explicitly discussed. You should talk about your potions or whatever your things are. You should write them with different names so that somebody can't just come and steal it.
Yeah.
Which, like I agree in the setting of medicine, you don't want that. But in every other setting, we appreciate that. It's like, there's constantly examples of shopkeepers or whatever, companies protecting their trade secrets, right? I mean, this
Right.
is a well-known fact. It's just when it comes to medicine and you're talking about the benefit of humans, it is not benefiting them by keeping things secret, which is why you almost need an open, collaboration. But
Right.
open collaboration, I think, I don't know. I was about to say requires monopoly, but I don't know if that's true.
I don't think so. I think so what's happening here is you can see where the monopoly is actually created, because now that the AMA is tied to the government and the government has boards that are regulating things, I can't now make like the AMO, the American Medical Organization, that has completely different structures, and we're really open and like open source everything. They'll squash that in 2 seconds. I can't even do it because it'll become, so maybe in the 1880s I could do it, but now that would be extremely illegal.
It wouldn't be illegal. It's just you wouldn't have the same.
I couldn't have people practicing medicine.
No, you couldn't. And I mean that is the thing, and that is the thing that potentially needs to be redressed. So, and actually, thank you. This is a very good transition, because I was going to say the next big, or another, I should say, big inflection point in the development of licensure and the monopolization of medicine by the allopaths, essentially, was in 1888 there was a Supreme Court case called Dent versus West Virginia. And so this was, as it says, the crucial test of the legitimacy of medical licensing occurred in 1888 when the issue came before the U.S. Supreme Court. Dent versus West Virginia. Frank Dent, an eclectic physician in practice for 6 years, had been convicted and fined under an 1882 West Virginia statute requiring a physician to hold a degree from a reputable medical college, pass an examination, or prove that he had been in practice in the state for the previous 10 years. So there was a grandfather clause. The State Board of Health deemed unacceptable Dent's degree from the American Medical Eclectic College of Cincinnati. I don't blame him. No, just kidding. Delivering the Supreme Court.
I hate that college.
Delivering the Supreme Court's unanimous opinion upholding the law.
Right.
Justice Stephen Field noted that every citizen had the right to follow any lawful calling, subject only to such restrictions as are imposed upon all persons of like age, sex, and condition. So that's an interesting clause.
Yeah.
But the state could protect society by imposing conditions for the exercise of that right, as long as they were imposed on everyone and were reasonably related to the occupation in question.
Right.
Few professions, he continued, require more careful preparation than that of medicine. It had to deal with all the subtle and mysterious influences, blah, blah, blah. It's saying how medicine's special. Everyone might have occasion to consult a doctor, but comparatively few can judge the qualification of learning and skill which he possesses. Reliance had to be placed on the assurance given by a license. Reasonable considerations, therefore, might prompt a state to exclude people without licenses from practicing medicine. In a later case, Hawker versus New York, 1898, the court extended the grounds for denying a medical license, noting that in a doctor, quote, character is an important qualification as knowledge. Character is as important a qualification as knowledge. At the state level, courts also supported medical practice laws. After the Supreme Court decision, there never seems to have been any serious question about the matter. So there you have it. So if you want to, I guess, if you're trying to break the monopoly on medicine, I think this is you have to address these Supreme Court cases.
Right. Yeah. But that is the issue. That is where the AMA entrenching themselves with government is a good move. It's like as a chess move, they won. That's checkmate.
Maybe
It's very close to checkmate.
I don't know, because this is the point. Is that there's a lot of interesting things here, a lot of assumptions that I think are worth going back and looking at. This quote from the Hawker versus New York in 1898 that character is as important a qualification as knowledge.
Right.
I don't know if that's true.
I guess important in what context?
In treating patients.
Right.
In the context of medicine.
If the placebo studies are true and placebos work as well, if not better, in as the real medicine in a number of cases, perhaps that statement is also true.
But it brings in this thing of by whose metric of character?
Sure. Well, right. If it's...
And has that metric changed in 100+ years?
Right.
I bet it has.
I bet the consumer's from the consumer's perspective, it's pretty important how you feel about your doctor. If you think that they're a great doctor, you think they're a great doctor, and you probably think they help you a lot.
Yeah, but I think also people at the end of the day just want to be cured. So if you're curing people, which is why I think like the greater emphasis is on knowledge.
Right.
If you're able to cure people at the end of the day, now I guess the character comes into account if you're like, yeah, if you're doing something malicious. But that's why I'm saying character can mean a lot of things, you know, and good character can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So that's like an example of something that I think should probably be reevaluated. And then also just this, you know, in the 1888 case, you know, what's this quote? It says, the state could protect society by imposing conditions for the exercise of that right as long as they were imposed on everyone and were reasonable related to the occupation in question. So it's the state could protect society by doing this, but are they protecting society by doing this? Is the society more protected because of this law?
Right.
I think you could evaluate that through, you know, basically the health of the constituents, which right now isn't very good.
But as he said earlier, health is also defined subjectively.
It can be.
Health is defined by doctors.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, you're right. Right now it is. I mean, yes. But everybody has a conception of health.
Right.
And it's a question of whether that shouldn't be more democratized. And even by the physician's definition of health, people are unhealthier now than they were 100 years ago in many metrics.
Right. Well, I think that all fits also because...
Not all metrics.
Right. I think that fits with the narrative of this book as well, because the physicians define what health is, then the physicians define you as unhealthy, therefore needing them to help you.
Yes. And maybe 100 years isn't good. Maybe like 70 years, I should say.
Right. I think that from my perspective, I agree that we are in an unhealthy population that is significantly less healthy than it used to be. And like we were saying, by some metrics, but by other metrics, we're a lot healthier.
Yeah, I think that one of the big ones is mortality, the fact that the longevity, I should say,
right,
is going down. No, but it's going down.
Going down now, but we still live longer now than we lived 400 years ago.
Yes. Yeah, which is why you can't say that modern medicine has been good for nothing. And then, of course, there are people who would say, well, that's more public health, you know, better hygiene and everything like that. But these were all things that physicians were sort of pushing for.
Right.
I mean, who was driving the public health efforts but physicians?
Right.
And scientific physicians. So I just want to be clear that, again, I'm trying to take a nuanced approach. I don't think that we're unhealthier in every respect, but I think that there are a few that are very alarming, and it does seem like for whatever reason the current system isn't addressing them, like diabetes and obesity and depression
out of control.
Just there. I mean,
and all of these things actually inform each other. Depression and obesity are tied together. Like it's, and like they're a vicious circle with each other.
And part of the issue might be that physicians can't address these things because they are created by our society. It's like you can't treat something that's so entrenched. You know, depression, I do think, is kind of part and parcel with modern society because it's just modern society. We're in such a different state from what our bodies evolved to be in that yeah, I think this is what creates depression for a lot of
Right.
people.
And all the drugs in the world might not be the fix.
Yes, but they can help because, it's like, yeah.
Maybe. I'm not even sure about
for
that
some
one,
people
but yeah.
they can. For some people they can. Some people really
Right.
like SSRIs.
I know they
that's-
like them, but like and help are not the same. A lot of people like cheesecake too.
True, but yes, no, of course. But you could say in terms of, again, this is, what's our qualification? How are we defining good and healthy?
Right.
SSRIs do help people function in society better. Many
Right.
people.
Yeah.
Not
but
everybody.
And even that, I think, if I'm putting a Foucault hat on, even
Yes.
that, like drugging people to be able to function in society.
But that's my
better
point. Yes. That was my point, though. That's
Right.
why it's a question of whether physicians even can address some of these issues because they're ultimately created by the society that we live in.
right.
Maybe all you can do is medicate the depression because you're not going to extinguish it from a society that functions this way.
Right. But by medicating it, you're also perpetuating it.
Oh, I don't know if that's true.
It's like if you're homeless.
How do
and
you know
you're
that's true? How do you know that?
Because
that's true.
If it's
And
a
that it wouldn't be-
societal problem and you're anesthetizing people to the problems of society, those problems will not get fixed.
Okay, I thought you meant depression.
No. I'm saying like as a
yes,
philosophically,
I agree with that. Yeah. Yeah.
it's like anesthetizing somebody to
Right.
pain will disincentivize them to get rid of that pain. They won't need to get rid of it because they won't care about it.
Yes, but you could justify that if people live longer and healthier. At least that is I would say that is the justification. That's the current justification for modern medicine. Is like, maybe there's all these things, but look at the outcomes. People are healthier on whole, or whatever it is. That's I think what people would say.
Right.
But I agree. Yeah, if you're
Like, I don't think
Yeah.
that most people would agree that being an alcoholic is a great way of dealing with life.
well, that's maybe most people. Yeah, I agree.
I mean, maybe you would. I think it would be a common thing that most people would be like, yes, I
Yeah.
agree, you probably shouldn't be an alcoholic as a way of dealing
Right.
with your life. To me, this is essentially this. You're making somebody an alcoholic.
Right. Well, and what was much more, I mean, that was the way I think people dealt with it back in the day is alcohol.
Right.
It's, yeah. I mean, like, we're
I'm not
talking,
saying that there haven't been people using substances to.
Well, but I think it's an important point, though, to address is, and it's a difficult one to study as we're talking about this,
Right.
is have people always been using substances to deal with life? Or is it
Probably.
a function of civilization? You know what I mean? So that's the thing is what's a different substance than to deal with life that is at least more well tested and whatnot. And so I agree the jury's kind of still out on some of these things because a lot of the drugs that we're using are new. But
Right.
in terms of alcohol, we know that long-term use of alcohol will cause all of these
no
other
good for you.
issues.
Yeah.
Yes. So the question is, okay, so don't use alcohol, not necessarily.
I mean, you don't even need the studies on
Yeah.
that one. You can also just see what it does to people. And then the
Alcohol.
studies can help. Like, you can see sort of physiologically what it does to your liver and your brain
Right.
and things like that, for sure. But you can also observe in the real world what somebody who's been an alcoholic for years is like versus what they used to be like. And you can see how it deteriorates their body. Like, you can
Yes.
physically see it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and in some cases, this is the case of prescribed drugs as well.
Right.
But it is, in many cases, less and at least more understood. I mean, it is less. I mean, this is the point. That's why a lot of them are prescribed
Less bad for
long-term.
you or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, again, now we can
Yeah.
debate about what is less bad. Nothing is without its side effects.
I think it's difficult, and I'm
Life
trying
is
to
a side
to be
effect.
fair here.
Life
Like,
is a side effect.
yeah, right. Yeah. If only that bastard God. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I think something like an article that just came out a couple days ago that they in the UK they had put a pause on puberty blockers as treatment for gender dysphoria,
Yes, right.
and now they've completely banned it. Mm-hmm. And we talked about this like a year ago. The medical organizations and newspapers within the United States were saying there are 0 negative side effects. Mm-hmm. That it doesn't do anything bad.
Yeah.
And that you can just pause puberty and then restart it sometime later in your life if you wish.
Right.
And it's like that was obviously not true. That's like really stupid. And anybody with a brain can know that that's wrong. And then like in the UK, they pause it and they do some studies and they're like, oh shit, this is really bad.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know enough about what specific physicians were saying. I can't imagine anybody said that it has no effect. No effect versus bad effect are different too. I mean,
No, not no effect. There are no negative side effects associated with puberty blockers.
Yeah. Physicians were saying that?
Yes, the Brown Medical School. Somebody actually tried to. Brown has this problem all the time. They do these studies and they find that this stuff is bad, and then the medical school won't let them publish these studies.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. And that's exactly the problem. Is that monopolization brings, and sort of goes back to the initial thing we were talking about, is that there is now a strong groupthink or in-group perspective as a physician, because any stepping out of line, then you can get censured, you can get delicensed, you can get ostracized by your peers from a field that you've been spending in many cases your entire life trying to get into. So there's a strong incentive to not step out of line from what the consensus is.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, there's easy ways to see how this is a problem. Yeah, because I mean, it's just you have to use common sense if you're adding something that is disrupting a very basic process.
Yeah. Of course, it'll. Yeah.
Yeah, because everything. I mean, we know this about learning, that there are the unfortunate thing about biology and time is that there are periods where you're more able to do certain things, and like learning and reading is one of them, which is why you want to expose children to reading early on, or else they won't ever really develop language in a sufficient way. Puberty is the same thing.
Right. And it's also a complicated enough process that it feels a little wild to think that you could know that everything that's happening. By stopping it, it feels. It's like when they said that like the COVID vaccine doesn't have any negative side effects, and it's just like it feels like it's too complicated a process to even be able to know that that's true.
Well, and you won't know until you wait and see,
right?
And in order to do that, you have to have a group that has not been vaccinated in a controlled manner, and they got rid of that by
exactly.
giving the vaccine to the control population.
Right. And I understand that it's all, like, these are all difficult things to do. And, like, it's not like it's easy to do medical research. It's a problem. And I don't think that people aren't doing their best in many situations. I think that the big question and, like, what's illuminating about this book to me is kind of what I was talking about before, about seeing it as an economic issue. Is, to me, there's a big question, is maybe not at the individual physician level, but maybe at the individual physician level. Is a doctor just doing a job to make money, or are they like a special priest trying to help people to the best of their ability? And I think that neither of those things is necessarily evil, but it changes your interaction with them.
Right.
And what their function is.
Well, and physicians of the 20th century were trying to be both.
Right. Serve two masters.
Yeah, and they effectively did.
Right.
I mean, even now, yeah. But you're right. I mean, yeah. I don't know. There's a lot to unpack here, Antushka.
Yeah, it's tricky stuff. I don't know. Because it isn't just medicine. I mean, reading this, it's like what I was saying. It makes me think of the public school system, but it starts to illuminate just tons and tons of things in our society where you can see these trajectories of how these systems have been built up over time, and how that's sort of increased the well-being of those in that system and has had positive effects moving out from there, but also creates like an extreme amount of corruption and unchangeability. And once that corruption starts, how do you get rid of it in a system that's that centralized and entrenched?
Yes. Yeah. And again, I don't even think getting rid of it is necessarily the answer. I think it's just allowing for more other voices.
Sure.
Is really what needs to happen. But I don't want to get rid of the AMA.
Right.
It's just there needs to be some kind of professional competition within medicine,
right?
So that one group doesn't become divorced from reality and too focused on abstractions that are created by the group, and abstractions being political in many cases of just like maintaining a certain stature. Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of things in reading chapter 3 that I had issues with of explaining just, I mean, first off, the whole idea that you shouldn't disagree with colleagues, essentially.
Right.
It's like this creates all sorts of problems. It's like we need to be able to voice our disagreements.
Right.
Or else we're going to basically get ourselves into a mess of silence.
Right.
Because, I mean, that's the only thing that can combat tyranny.
Right.
So I think that's a big thing is there needs to be, I mean, that could be the first thing that happens is somehow empowering individual physicians to go against the grain.
Right. It's tricky because that same empowerment also requires a higher degree of responsibility on the individual level.
Right. And it explains, again, these chapters explain all the forces that led to the consolidation that were pushing against this. And we talked about it too now, even more, how difficult it is to set up a practice now. It's not like in the early 1800s where you could just walk around and you didn't even have a stethoscope yet. Lamarck hadn't even invented the stethoscope.
Yeah, how did anybody know they were doctors if they didn't have one of those things around their neck?
You had leeches, that's how. If somebody had leeches, they were a
that
doctor.
Guy's got leeches, he must be a doctor.
Yeah.
That's pretty weird.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's just you didn't need nearly as much infrastructure.
Right.
That's another big point that they made. But then you have the establishment of the hospital. You have all the ancillary things that come with it. You have you have MRI machines now. I mean, it's like you can't afford an MRI machine if you're one doctor, you know?
Right.
So, I mean, it's just there's logistic issues now. Technology really, I think, is probably, at the end of the day, like always, the answer to changing things. If you can somehow develop a technology, a diagnostic technology that allows physicians to be more independent, then they will be. But right now, you can't really practice medicine in isolation well in the allopathic field. Yeah. And even the osteopathic, which is sort of many of the people, so DO, right, the other type of medicine that was invented in the 1890s as by rural physicians. It was more mechanistic. It's looking at, I mean, osteo comes from bone. It's really focused on the structure of the body. It looks at disease as kind of you need to get the body back into its sort of normal position, its limbs back in the normal position or whatever. Anyway, I'm not a DO, so I take that all with a grain of salt. Apologies if I butchered that, but that's yeah. Anyway,
It sounds funny.
But the point is, and I think there's some truth behind that, by the way, too. I actually have a lot of interest in osteopathic medicine. At some point, if I ever have time, I'll read more about it. I have a textbook. I just haven't ever gotten a chance to go through it.
Are we going to do that one next?
We should. No, but it's interesting because it looks at.
I'll read it.
Well, it's a textbook. It's not going to be.
Textbooks are fun.
Yeah. Said nobody ever.
I like textbooks.
I do too, but we're geeks and nerds.
Yeah. We're geeks and nerds?
And nerds.
No.
We're both. But anyway, what's my point? I didn't even remember. I got off on too much of a tangent. I think all my point is that Monopoly's bad. Okay.
So are you still optimistic?
Of course.
I'm going to check in every chapter of this book.
Yeah, I know. I'm fine. I'm not Mr. Sad Sack like you.
Yeah,
sad at the state of humanity.
Very, optimistic at the moment.
No, it's the holidays. Come on.
I don't know. I don't know how to do it. It's so annoying, but it's I just want people to not be shitty to each other.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because I don't think it's ever going to happen. I guess I was just.
That's interesting because you're an idiot.
I really don't think it'll ever happen.
It's
unfortunately.
I think that I don't think it's going to happen writ large, but I think it's part of the cultural thing, and it's if I can get my kids to operate by treating people with respect, things like not trying to steal, not valuing other people, and when I hire musicians, I try and pay them equally. We're all sharing in trying to do as well as we can here, rather than specifically trying to screw other people over for your own benefit. And it's what we've talked about, where giving cookies to your neighbors, it benefits you too. It's important.
Are you familiar with Yetzer Hara?
No.
So it's in Judaism, Yetzer Hara is a term that refers to the innate human tendency to do evil.
Right. Nice. Yeah.
And I don't know if I think it's innate. Well, I do. I agree with this to an extent, and that's kind of why I'm saying it'll never happen. Is I think that there is within us.
I agree.
Yeah. So and
the line between good and evil runs down the human heart. I don't remember whose quote that is, but
somebody who gets quoted too much.
I think so. Yeah.
But the point is though that and then consciousness is supposed to fight against that. Blah blah blah. We won't
that's Solzhenitsyn.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Anyway,
Lex Friedman loves him.
Who?
Lex Friedman.
Oh yeah. I don't listen to him too much, although I did like the Javier Milei podcast with him.
Yeah, I haven't listened to him in a while, but I feel like he would bring it up a lot.
Yeah. I know. I agree with that. I think that people have an innate capacity to do evil.
Well, you're Jewish. Welcome to the tribe. As not a member, as not a member of the tribe, I welcome you.
Yeah. But that's I see the function of culture and civilization as a way, I see it, in I work in a church. I see it every week. At least it's an attempt against that. It's not like those people aren't corrupt in all their own ways, and I'm corrupt in all my own ways. I'm not better than other people. It's that I want to see people working towards fostering this. It's not it's not that I think it will succeed. It's just I don't love seeing people just really sink into it and take no responsibility. Sorry, I'm just going to be a bastard. And yeah.
No, I agree with that. And that's where, I don't know. Because it's obviously you want to try getting back. We'll come full circle to the landlord stuff. I mean, you want to try to you want to try to approach them with kindness, but at a certain point, people just won't respond to it. And so you have to take a more aggressive approach through lawfare, not, violence, obviously.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, but that requires resources. Yeah, which is why what you should do is make a lot of money, and then you can have a voice.
Right.
Tushka.
I can have a voice. Yeah. I'll get like something will make me famous. I'll get on Joe Rogan and I'll be like, you know what I want to talk about? Tenants' rights. And he's like, no, I want to talk about bears and boxing. And it's like, no. Stop that. Yeah.
That would be hilarious to see you on there.
No, I don't think so. But
yeah.
Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, I think so what are we reading for next week? So the listeners can read along with us and email us at what's our email?
Oh, yeah, plausibledeniabilityamx@gmail.com. It's also in every bio.
Okay, good.
If you forget. But it's buried. And I doubt everybody looks at our bio, obviously. I don't mean bio, too. I mean when I say bio, I mean description, comment, the episode description. Yeah, I mean, I guess you don't have to read the first half of chapter 3 if you don't want to. I would say if we could do medical education and the restoration of occupational control, start there and read through chapter 3.
Okay.
And then, I'm gonna because it's the holidays, I'm gonna just start reading as much of this as I can. So I'm gonna read into chapter 4, but you can feel free to read as much as you want. If you can at least get through the latter half of chapter 3, though.
Yeah, that works for me. Cool. And when are we going to record?
Good question. Is Christmas
Wednesday
next week?
Is Christmas, yeah.
Okay, so Christmas.
I don't think that's a bad choice on my part.
God, what do you have, a family you want to hang out with or something?
What about Thursday during the day?
Yeah, I mean, my schedule's open, so really I
still have Mozart's like every day. So from 4 to 11, I'm booked. But
are you doing it on Christmas?
No, but the day before and the day after.
Okay, well that'll be fun. Yeah, no, I mean whenever.
Okay.
Yeah, whenever. I'm pretty much. I think I'm pretty much open. The 26th, I might be doing family stuff, but we can tentatively put something down.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
I could also do the 27th, but it's late in the week, and it's Friday.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I guess the 26th would probably be the best.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And then we can brag about all of our
presents.
Of presents, yeah.
Yeah, from listeners.
Dude, I just got from my door, this is exciting, a shipment from Porto's, which is this Cuban cafe in L.A., and they're amazing. And they make these amazing Christmas cookies. So we just got a shipment of them.
Wow,
I'm so excited.
Nice.
Yeah.
You ever had skorpa?
No.
It's a Swedish breakfast. It's like a biscotti.
Oh, nice.
It's good with coffee.
Yeah, it seems like a coffee thing.
It's cardamom, basically just cardamom.
Ooh,
yeah.
That's
cool. Yeah, we always have that stuff. I should try to make it sometime. But
nice.
Yeah.
Wait, are you going back up?
Yeah, Friday.
Nice. That's cool.
Are you? You're not, right? Yeah.
Nope.
Wow. Staying here.
Staying in Texas, doing sound gigs in the rain. What?
You're afraid of the drones.
I'm not afraid of the drones.
What do you think about the drones?
I don't give a shit.
You don't think about them?
Nope. Don't care.
Really? Interesting.
I think it's like a thing to stir people up. Yeah. I think like somebody knows what they are. I don't know. Yeah. If they start bombing people, then that'll freak me out.
Then you'll freak out. Okay. Well, that's good. You have a threshold to freak out. Yeah, no, I'm very interested. I mean, I agree there's probably some weird distraction thing, but it's very strange.
Yeah, it's pretty weird.
And there's just so much other stuff going on, too. I mean, there's another shooting. There was the CEO murder. There's just a lot of stuff going on. And here we are just talking about medicine's development and new professionalism.
It's good, though, because we're not getting distracted. We're staying on point.
No, and these will be perennial episodes because, I mean, there's something to be said about podcasts that talk about current events. It is kind of interesting. I do this. It's interesting to go back and listen to something 7 years ago and remember what was happening at the time. Mm-hmm. But it also gets a little tiresome.
Thaddeus Russell just put out a two episode series that was pretty interesting. I just finished it. He was talking about JFK, because he was talking about how he has all these libertarian anti-war friends who are really into RFK Jr. And I guess one of his first books was on Jimmy Hoffa and the labor movement in the mid 20th century, which RFK Sr. was a big part of. And so he has this whole thing like that JFK and RFK are not peace people. They're not anti-war at all.
They're progressives.
Exactly. Like super pro-war, and that all of these libertarians being essentially like potentially suckered by RFK Jr. better watch out.
Yeah, I have an interesting, well, I don't know if it's interesting opinion about him, but I'm a little hesitant about him. Yeah.
I think that's very fair. I'm hopeful, but I also would not be surprised if he is not what he seems to be.
But I mean, yeah, it's true. I mean, I should hate him because of the vaccine stance and everything like that. But, you know, I think vaccines are effective, but I also just think that there is more scientific scrutiny that should be done.
Right.
I don't know if RFK Jr. is the guy to make it happen, though.
Yeah.
I just think there should be more scrutiny of medicine in general, I guess, from the public, and any sort of methods to squelch this discussion is bad. But yeah, I mean, I have a feeling like he's a CIA plan or something, but I don't know. I mean, I just like...
Well, what's the No Agenda podcast? They call him Bobby the Op.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, I really like all he says about the bureaucracy. I mean, that's the thing, is there's a lot of things that these people do that I don't agree with, but it's like, I think a lot of Americans are coming to the conclusion that there is a bureaucratic issue.
Right. They're like, hey, maybe there is an issue.
Yeah. Anyway, we don't have to get into all that. This is an example of things that everybody else on podcast talks about. That.
Yes.
We are different because we don't. We talk about it from a boring philosophical or historical perspective.
Right. Yeah. We're just holding that line. It's really boring, but at least it's like.
But it needs to happen because,
we're not
again,
hopefully,
you know, and I was thinking about this. We don't really say what we hope people to get out of these podcasts, but I guess what I hope is that people are getting the important dates and events that a lot of these things that caused a lot of these bigger things to occur. Yeah. So like the legislative stuff that we talked about today, or just, you know, when we talk about like Nietzsche. I mean, Nietzsche is explaining a lot of what we saw. That's why he's so interesting. He was projecting where things were going very well.
Yep.
And I mean, honestly, same with Marx in some sense.
Yeah. I think all this stuff is important in understanding where we are and why it is that the world looks the way it does. And actually, that's why I thought the Thaddeus Russell podcast was interesting. I was actually going to send it to you because he does a great book series where he goes through what he thinks are like the 20 most important books for people in the modern world to know about. But he does this whole, when he's talking about JFK and RFK Sr., he actually traces a lineage all the way back to the Bible. So he starts with Genesis and the book of Matthew, and then he goes to Locke and the Founding Fathers. I mean, it's interesting. We haven't done the Bible, but he does a lot of the same stuff that we've talked about as sort of foundational principles of progressivism, the progressive movement, all the way to the modern neoconservative movement, the wars in Afghanistan and stuff. And he said it's all the same lineage. And recently, like the Founding Fathers are tied directly to Locke, who sources his theories directly to biblical injunctions.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, a lot of the early logic was just like in the Odyssey, was using sort of the religious dogma of the day. Right. Although Locke also pushed against a lot of that. I mean, that was the whole thing with the first book of the treatises on government. Right. Is like pushing against this idea of divine right of kings. Although, yeah, I mean, fair enough. I think he did it with biblical examples. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think what Thaddeus Russell was drawing on was the second book, and actually the property coming out of mixing your labor with the soil,
right,
being related to the biblical the Great Commission, the idea that man is given dominion over the earth.
Right.
And so, like, manifest destiny is another way of looking at this. And the idea that not only does mixing your labor with the earth allow you to possess it, it's also you are compelled by God to be productive. And this is like what Locke was talking about how it's only right to take land away from, primitive people who are not using that land productively.
Yeah.
Which goes directly to the founding fathers, and like I guess that's what George Washington, before he was the general of the rebel army, was doing. He was a surveyor, and he would take armies of men out and like kick natives off, and so that land could be used productively.
Well, it wasn't just that. I mean, it was yes, he was instrumental in sort of settling the Ohio Valley,
right,
and surveying the Ohio Valley. And it wasn't so much just kicking him off. I mean, they were at war with the French, and so the French had allied with, anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Who cares? Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, but yeah. So there were. I mean, we were allied with, we being, I guess, the Americans, but the British Americans at the time, right? Because they were all British.
Yep.
Allied with one tribe, and the French allied with another, and so yeah, he almost died actually in a famous sort of thing in the Ohio Valley. I think that's I mean, this is one people say it's like everything is sort of all of our institutions come from this, I guess, Puritan and Anglican perspective, I suppose, ultimately. Yeah.
The Great Commission.
Right. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that was exactly how Locke justified property from Adam. God bequeathed the world to Adam and every one of their children. Cool.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. No. All right. Well, this is hopefully a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
I don't know what it'll be called, but it'll be called something.
Yeah, something. All right. Did we say goodbye to folks? No. All right.
See ya.
Bye.